We live in a highly connected world, but one split by deep economic divides and lines drawn on maps that often ignore the people actually living there. This map of 15th century Europe illustrates a trapped economy. High-demand goods like silk and precious stones were concentrated in Asia, and the traditional land routes to acquire them were controlled by powerful merchants, making goods incredibly expensive. To bypass these high costs, countries like Portugal and Spain started pouring money into experimental navigation, map-making, and ship design. The goal was strictly financial: find a way around the land trade blockade. The investments paid off. Explorers like Vasco da Gama established direct sea routes to India, while Columbus, sailing west for Asia, reached the Americas. What began as a venture to secure cheaper spices launched the largest wealth extraction project in human history. As Spain established colonies across Central and South America, massive quantities of gold and silver began flowing back across the Atlantic. This windfall disrupted the European balance of power, prompting rival nations like England and the Netherlands to launch their own expeditions to avoid falling behind economically. By the 1600s, expansion was increasingly outsourced to massive, privately owned corporations like the East India Companies. These trading firms operated essentially as independent states. They maintained their own private armies and used military force to conquer and govern entire regions. Take India, for example. European powers initially arrived there simply to trade. Over time, the British East India Company used alliances and military victories to transition the region from a trading partner to a wholly controlled colonial asset. Colonialism had evolved from a royal race for exploration into a highly organized, privatized business enterprise focused on territorial dominance. In the American colonies, the economic potential of cash crops like sugar and tobacco was immense, but extracting that value required a labor force far larger than what European settlers could provide. To solve this labor deficit, colonial governments and merchants turned to the brutal forced transportation of millions of Africans across the Atlantic. This diagram of the Brooks slave ship reveals the calculated reality of that trade. To maximize profit margins, companies treated human beings as cargo, packing them into holes with industrial precision. By the late 1800s, the Industrial Revolution was accelerating in Europe, creating an urgent demand for rubber, copper, and minerals to fuel new manufacturing lines. This map shows the result: the scramble for Africa. Between the 1880s and 1914, competing European powers rushed to claim the continent. European diplomats drew rigid geometric lines across the map, prioritizing resource ownership over existing ethnic or cultural realities. By the eve of the First World War, the globe had been forcibly re-engineered into a captive supply chain feeding European industry. Maintaining these territories required immense capital. The devastation of the two world wars bankrupted the European powers, making their empires impossible to sustain. Simultaneously, anti-colonial resistance movements gained unstoppable momentum. Millions of people organized to demand independence. The international pressure became too heavy. Between 1945 and 1975, a rapid wave of decolonization swept the globe, and the European empires formally dissolved. The departing colonial governments left behind a complex physical architecture, including global trade networks and railways, but those structures were built entirely for extraction. For many nations, the inheritance included shattered local cultures, economic dependency, and deep instability caused by artificially drawn borders. The empires have fallen, but look at any modern geopolitical crisis or economic divide, and you will find the fingerprints of that 500-year blueprint.